views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to writers and journalists and reporters and editors and anybody who works in the print media and writes about the borough of the Bronx. And then in our second segment, sometimes we do photographers and filmmakers and visual artists, but in this case, we have a Bronx author who wrote an absolutely heart-wrenching, fascinating book called The Woman of Endurance, and we'll do that in our second segment. But to get started, let's bring in the climate reporter for City Limits, and she's also a Report for America Corps member, and it's our buddy Liz Donovan. Nice to have you with us, Liz.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for having me.
You wrote an article which cuts to the core of what many people in the Bronx have been saying for many, many years. And the headline is simply, Bronx residents demand closure of polluting peaker plants as state ramps up renewable energy. So I'll give the little summary and then you can talk in detail about it. The story is that the Governor Hochul, has come up with a multifaceted energy plan that's supposedly going to save energy and save the environment. And yet the 4 peaker plants that are in the Bronx that are really causing a lot of pollution and airborne diseases are not being shut down. You saw a protest. Tell us about what you saw and what people in the Bronx are talking about.
Yeah, well, as we know, Governor Hochul last year accepted 2 proposals to bring renewable energy into the state, and they were trying to choose one. They decided to go with 2, so that was great. But then, as that is progressing, Bronx residents are wondering when these fossil fuel generating peaker plants, which are just known to be expensive and dirty energy, and can contribute to health problems like asthma, when those will be shut down. So it's great that we're moving to renewable energy, but now let's try to remove some of the sources of pollution that have led to these high asthma rates, especially in children in the Bronx. So what this protest was about was not necessarily asking them to close the plants tomorrow, but just to come up with a commitment of a timeline that's reasonable. So right now we're hearing from New York Power Authority by 2035, which of course is a long time from now. And that's a long time for, air pollutants to get into the lungs of Bronx children. And that's what the concern is.
I would say, and my many friends who are advocates in those groups I would say to them that they're being too kind, because you said, if they don't want them to shut it down tomorrow. Yeah, they do. They'd love to see them shut it down tomorrow. Let's be real. But I think the thing was, what the feeling was, they were created in 2001. And Governor Pataki at that time promised they would be shut down. And I think there's the ongoing feeling, and this goes to so many issues in the Bronx, of people not being straight with us, and then ultimately, we pay the price, and we pay the price in a very difficult way with lungs and our children and asthma and everything else. So what I think I want to do in a similar vein, we did interview a president of NYPA, the New York Power Authority Development, in December, and he told us what the story was, and you can see my reaction, which I think reflects what I just said. So let's take a look at Bronx Talk, that's our other program, and what Phil Toya of the New York Power Authority said when I asked him about when are we shutting down those peaker plants.
Shashank, to address some of this as well, but NYPA is working in collaboration with local Bronx interest groups and New York City-based environmental groups to do an assessment to look at transitioning our peaker fleet to low to zero carbon resources by 2035. So those transition plans are currently, the studies are being conducted, and that's in development, and that the results of those studies will be shared publicly when we get to that point. So that's, first and foremost on that. As far as the displacement of other fossil resources. I think you touched upon the statistics, the numbers earlier, and I think that's really up to I'll say what other market participants do to those resources. But I think Luke has some more details on
Sure,
that.
we'll go around the room with it. I will say 2035 is nice to hear, but of course it's 15 years away, and that's 15 years of affecting Bronx lungs, and that's not going to make anybody around here very happy. So there you go. I mean, 2035, as I said there, I'm going to repeat it again. That's the one thing they don't want to hear, right? I mean, I'm assuming you saw that sentiment. Do you have a sense that there's they can create enough energy? I know that we're cutting down Indian Point, and that's created a shortfall. Do you have where are we at with this thing? Why won't they just say, okay, you guys are right. Let's create enough energy so we don't need those peaker plants. What's your sense about that?
And the sense right now, I'm not sure. The sense I have right now is that's part of what New York Power Authority says they're trying to look into, and try to make sure that the city does have all of the energy needs, met. We are seeing more frequent heat waves. As we did this past summer, I think there were 3 record-breaking heat waves where air conditioning was being used at an extensive amount. So I think that is something that they're looking into. I don't know the answer of what actually. Yeah.
Peaker, I'll just give you and this is right out of your article. Peaker plants around the city emit twice as much carbon dioxide per unit of electricity than regular power plants, and 20 times as much nitrogen oxides. My feeling on this is I guess personal in a way. We've heard this so much in the Bronx. It's like they created this whole plan and nobody said, hey, maybe we ought to come up with a thing. They're doing a study now, right? Is that's where what you've reported and what's going on right now?
Yeah, they said they were looking into, they're working with the Peak Coalition, which is a group of environmental and community organizations that are working together to look into how to make the transition and make it a just transition. So I guess we'll see, but certainly there's a lot of mistrust in this neighborhood and in other neighborhoods, and other environmental justice neighborhoods of the city. The power plants, like we talked about before, opened in 2001. They're actually a little bit newer, or a lot newer than some of the others around the city, which go back to the 50s and 60s.
Really?
They were supposed
Let me just ask you something about that. So my guess is that they're in Queens or other places. And are people there as concerned as the people in the Bronx are?
Yeah, I think there have been movements around peaker plants and shutting down the peaker plants citywide. Certainly, yeah.
Again, I'm just trying to get my arms around the idea of creating a plan that supposedly is going to create. Now, you must see this all the time in your work as a climate reporter. That supposedly is going to create clean energy, and not looking at the most polluting, fossil fuel processes that we've got going on. I can't figure it out. I don't want to put you on the spot and solve our problems, but it just doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Yeah, I think, we're just going to have to see across the board an increased concern and a closer eye at all of these, so that we're able to meet the requirements of the CLCPA within the time frame.
Do you see, I mean, in your work and covering governments and how they're handling climate change, do you see these kinds of things often? Frankly, in other things where people are saying, hey, wait a minute, you're spending the money, spend it this way, and it's kind of misdirected? Or is this really a unique situation?
No, I think it's pretty much across the board.
Wow.
There's a big call.
I'm really sorry to hear you say that.
It's just there's a big call for government officials who are making decisions and doing these studies to be collaborating with the people within the communities who are most impacted. So it is a good thing to hear that NYPA is working with the Peak Coalition.
Or at least they're listening. And listen, they came on TV and we had an extensive interview about all that stuff. So let's be fair. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I think as long as we're working with people and that are in the communities that are being impacted, to hear their input so that we're not ending up doing more harm. When we talked about before, when I was on your show, the converter station that was set to be in the Bronx
Yes, that's
Terminal
right. I
Mall
forgot
area.
that was really step one before we're now at step 2 or 3 or whatever the heck we are.
Right. And the company did agree to move the station to an industrial area, which was good to see. But it does, I think, cause a little bit of frustration within the community that they're not consulted and they're not made aware of these.
I wonder, you follow the politics of it as much as I do, that we're in a situation now where there's a whole new city council, and largely women, but certainly the representation in the Bronx is grassroots, and I could list the number of council members, and then you can go up into the assembly of young people who grew up with this stuff and know this stuff, unfortunately, like they know their own names. I wonder if there's going to be greater pressure on the legislatures to handle these things. I mean, that would be a hopeful thing.
Yeah, we'll see. There's certainly an increased focus on it, and we're seeing that at both the state level and the city level. So I think we can be encouraged by that.
I'm nosing around here. What's new? What are you working on? I mean, I know all the Bronx stuff, and we could talk about the daylighting project over there in Van Cortlandt Park, et cetera, et cetera. But you got any tips of what we should look for? What's coming out now?
We're looking
a lot of infrastructure work I'm thinking about.
Yeah, there's some infrastructure work. I'm particularly interested in the waterfront, how we're going to see the waterfront in the next 10 years, and some types of resiliency that is going to be put in place at the waterfront, how that will benefit the communities there, looking at some issues of new transport facilities going on along the waterfront, and how that impacts the communities there. So there's a lot going on right now, both good and bad, and I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and we got to run. In a way, it's the same story as this. I mean, social justice and environmental justice is, right at the top of a lot of people's lists. That's the way it is. And to make it or give us a half a chance, people like Liz Donovan at City Limits are writing about it and reporting on it. And we thank you for your time this evening. And what we're going to do, folks, we are going to take a short break. And after that break, we'll be back with a Bronx author who has written a stirring novel that you're going to want to hear about. So don't go away.
When taking public transportation, don't touch your phone. Carry hand sanitizer and use it immediately upon leaving the bus or train. Avoid touching your face. If someone is coughing or sneezing, move away. Wash your hands with soap and water as soon as possible. Limit contact with poles. If possible, avoid rush hour. Don't eat or drink on public transportation. Keep your bag off the floor or other surfaces. Avoid directly touching turnstiles. Stay up to date with the latest from your local health department and CDC.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz, and let's go right now to who's becoming a friend because she's been on our program before. She's a novelist and memorist, she says, but it is Dahlma Llanos-Figueroa. Nice to have you with us, Dahlma.
Oh, it's so nice to be invited back.
Well,
This is like home.
Well, that's a very good thing and a
Yeah.
very good sign. But
Yeah.
what I really appreciate is the reason that you're here is because you have a book that's coming out just a couple of days away. We're pretty
Mhm.
excited about that. I was particularly, as I told you just before the show, particularly struck by the subject matter. But before we get to that, one of the things in your background is that you have a storytelling legacy. And that was inherited from when you came to the South Bronx and your relatives, as I
Mhm.
understand. Why don't you talk about that and how that informs your work as a writer and an author?
Sure. I first encountered storytelling. Well, my mother was a storyteller in terms of family. Um, we had moved from Puerto Rico, where I was born, to New York City, and she wanted to maintain the ties to the island and our relatives there and our culture. And so she would always tell stories. But I really became enamored of storytelling when I was sent to live with my grandparents in rural Puerto Rico. And the women would sit on my grandmother's porch and tell each other stories.
Wow.
Of course, they probably already knew those stories. They've been told 100 times, but they loved storytelling. And I was a child, so I couldn't enter the conversation. But I sat in the doorway and just listened and learned about
Mm.
story,
And,
how
and
to. Mhm,
you were wide-eyed and wide-eared. Um,
absolutely.
Before we go to the next step, these were stories about things they knew or remembered, or they liked telling stories, like creating, fictional characters or
Right.
things I remember. And as if my grandmother once, left
Mhm.
home and joined the circus and they created something, or were they really telling stories of whatever they had
They were
remembered?
telling stories about themselves,
Wow.
everybody in the community, stories they got from their parents and grandparents.
Hmm.
Now, my grandmother was born near the turn of the century, of the near 1900s. So when she spoke about her grandmother, she was talking about a woman who lived in the 1800s. So for me, it was a brand new world,
Right.
and
And,
I
and
was totally amazed.
And then, so that translated into now your first book was Daughters of the Stone. It was a finalist for the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize. We talked about that the last time you were
Mhm.
here. And then this book is you telling a story, but you embellished it a little bit.
Okay, this is not a story based on
Let,
his.
First of
Okay,
all, the name of the book, and we want to show it.
okay.
We'll
The
show.
name of
Oh,
the book is
there
A
we go.
Woman of Endurance,
There you go.
and A Woman of Endurance is the English edition. There is a Spanish edition called Indomita, and it is about a woman who was purchased as a breeder, and she was brought to Puerto Rico from West Africa, and her owner used her really as a manufacturer of other um, enslaved people. And so every time she had a baby, it was taken
Incredible.
away and sold.
I'm trying to find the words. It's just incredible. It's horrible. The thought of it, the abuse. I mean, how many things can you list?
Mhm.
And so these things happened.
Yes.
And
And it happened, by the way, in Virginia, in Aruba, in different places.
did you hear about this specifically through some of the storytelling you had as a youngster, or was it just that style of interpreting real life and telling the story, something that you learned how to do?
Right. I knew about this type of use of African women from historical events.
Uh-huh.
This particular story is fiction. It didn't come from a story told by anybody I heard of, but I put myself in the position of that woman and how would she live? How would she, more importantly, how did she heal? Because had a woman like this been put through that and not healed, I would not be here. Many of us would not be here. So how did she endure? How did she overcome that type of treatment.
Maybe you're asking it rhetorically, or maybe you answer it in the book, but I don't know how. And I guess then that stands up as, here we are, a Women's History Month, or we're recording it in Women's History Month, and people will see it right after that. But what a story! What a role model! But you'd rather people don't have to go through that, but just to understand the human spirit, the strength of the human spirit.
Absolutely.
How has it been received? How have people taken it? I mean, to me, it's life-changing. I'll never forget that, I can't wait to see the book and read the book, but I'll never forget that we've had this conversation, because you can't lose it, So what are the reactions, and who do you hope to reach, and what do you hope to make, get, what would you like to see the response be?
Oh my goodness. Well, of course, it would be nice to have a miniseries streaming, but that's pie in the sky. But I would love that.
Wow, what a tough miniseries that would be.
I hope that as much as readers read about the treatment of these women, they don't stay stuck in the barbarity of it, but get beyond it to how can we take lemons and make lemonade? We are faced with realities, and I think that's why I think this book is for everyone, because all of us, regardless of language, cultural heritage, geography, all of us face some really daunting experiences in our lives.
At different levels.
At different levels, absolutely.
No question.
I ground mine on the history of Puerto Rico in the 19th century, but I hope that we can see the humanity in all of us and the commonality of it. And I look at your reaction, and you're a 21st century white man in New York.
Yes.
And yet you are moved by this story.
Oh. Well, either you're human or you're not. I mean, what can I tell you? I'm just curious about this, because you say you see my reaction. In order to write a book, an educated and something, a scholarly work of any sort, it takes time, and it takes commitment to, of course, every word. How did you get through it? In other words, was it difficult? You said, okay, now I'm going to imagine this just horror story, and then how did you get through it? I don't know how else to ask the question.
It wasn't easy, because
Really?
in order for me to touch the reader, I have to go there. And so writing some of the scenes were really difficult. And at one point I ended up in a hospital because it was a tough place to be.
Wow.
But
and when you say the hospital, because you were mentally or psychologically or even physically
no,
exhausted?
what happened was I finished writing a scene that was very difficult, and I thought, oh, I did a good job. And then I got up and I started throwing up, and I didn't stop throwing up for 3 days.
Dahlma, I wish you were here. I wish we weren't virtual. I'd give you a big hug right now. If we were still in the studio, I would get up out of my chair and give you a hug.
Well, next time you see me, you can hug me.
Oh, that'll be fair enough.
Okay.
But that all of that underscores the title, and a woman of endurance. And as you said, let's not get lost in the barbary, but let's get lost in the fact that here's a woman who grew up and moved on, et cetera, et cetera. Stupid question, but everybody wants to know, how long did it take you to write it?
Oh my goodness.
Because the research and putting yourself in the mind of being back there then.
Yes. The research took the most time. Probably actual writing probably took 4 or 5 years.
And I bring that up because, it's after we've talked about some very deep things, the simple, that fact also encapsulates how important the work is, that it's not just a story you told to dash off and now here's the story.
Oh no, no dashing.
Right. Right. Do you in your mind have a series? I realize you want to make this a TV series, but a series of books, like you say now, well, I've done this and now I have that.
Mhm.
Or is this so all encompassing and takes so much time and effort and everything that you need to put into it that ultimately you just can't even think about anything else?
Well, that's a great question. Um,
We all do what we're supposed to do.
yes, and we do it well. Daughters of the Stone the first book covered 5 generations, and the readers kept wanting to know, well, what happened to this one, or what happened to the other one, or what comes next. And so I realized that Daughters of the Stone was the foundation from which everything else will grow. And yes, it will be a series. I'm hoping to take one generation at a time. And so the main character in A Woman of Endurance, whose name is Pola, was introduced in Daughters of the Stone, and now she has her own book.
So we could definitely see, as you take a moment to think about it, how you can extrapolate it to the next point. The last thing I want to ask you about is our home borough of the Bronx, and I always ask this question to artists and writers and photographers: How does the Bronx inform your inspiration or helped you do this? And I know what I would guess, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I see so many of my characters in the voices and the faces and the bodies of people in the Bronx. The Bronx feeds me. I hear it in their music, in the food, in the even in the diversity. Because in this book there is diversity, even though the action never leaves Puerto Rico. I think the Bronx informs everything I do, just like Puerto Rico.
Just like it does me. Listen, I'm going to add one word to that. And what I see in my friends and neighbors in the Bronx is the strength. And if you talk about a woman of endurance, the strength of the so many. I mean, I don't have to list all the things we're last in, and you can start with health care and health numbers. But food insecurity, homeless. I mean, we know what they are, but yet here we are, and we have that. We're men and women of endurance. Listen,
now that you say that, I have to say that the Woman of Endurance revolves around a Black community, right? That supports each other in many ways. And what you just said about the Bronx is very much the same.
That's who we are.
I'm thinking about the fire that we had lately.
We do got to run.
Okay.
Dahlma Llanos-Figueroa. The book is A Woman of Endurance, beginning April 12th. It'll be available everywhere. Get into it. Enjoy it.
It's available now. So.
To Dahlma, and then previously to Liz Donovan. And guess what? We're going to see you next week. Good night.